we've been lied to for decades.
We've got about 35 years worth of oil left in the whole world.
A major energy crisis.
For as long as we've been consuming oil, we've been running out.
In 10 years, if we do nothing, we will be importing more than half our oil at prices fixed by others.
The common narrative is that the US needs to become independent from foreign sources, or risk
An economic, social, and political crisis that will threaten our free institutions.
To free ourselves from imported oil.
But today, after decades of warnings about America running out of crude and being warned about imported oil on the surface, nothing appears to have changed. Today, the United States oil and gas industry is in its golden age. They overtook Russia in 2011 and became the world's top producer of natural gas. They overtook Saudi Arabia in 2018 and became the world's top producer of petroleum. And by 2022, they produced roughly the same amount of oil as they consumed. So you would think that they finally freed themselves of imported oil. But yet, 40% of the oil they consumed was imported, and 8% of this came from Russia. We have now entered a new global energy crisis, and consumers are noticing this at the pump. Historically, whenever this happens, it starts a new cycle of dire warnings in the media. So let's take a step back and look at the origins of the oil industry in the United States and how this created a recurring narrative of doom and gloom. This is the big lie about the US oil industry. With hindsight. Okay, so this is me, and if you've been following this channel for a while, you might know that this is actually the first time that I appear on the channel myself. And the reason for that is BetterHelp, the sponsor of today's video. When I just started on this adventure of creating a YouTube channel, BetterHelp was on a very short list of sponsors that I hope to one day affiliate with this channel. And the reason for that is because I truly believe in the transformative effects of therapy. I've seen it a couple of times in my life, very up close. And I live here in a country where nobody speaks my native language. So online therapy is for me the only way to go at it. This is how it works. Go to betterhelp.com/hindsight and you get to answer a couple of questions about yourself and your goals in therapy, but also about your personal preferences about how a therapist communicates and acts around you. Then, when you're done, they sign you up with one of their 30,000 therapists, and each of them has either a bachelor's degree or a master's degree, but at least 1,000 hours of experience helping people just like you. But in the end, it's all about finding that personal connection. So if you don't like the person that they matched you with, you can easily change to somebody else in your settings. It's really that easy. So if you're ready to prioritize your mental health, go to betterhelp.com/hindsight or select Hindsight at sign up for a special discount off your first month of therapy. Today, the global oil and gas industry is the largest industry in the world by revenue. It brings us more than twice as much revenue as the global tourism sector, and it's twice the size as global car manufacturing. It's a truly massive industry, and it started in the United States. In western Pennsylvania in the 1850s, it was relatively common to find sites where petroleum was seeping from the ground. Edwin Drake had been drilling for years when Seneca Oil Company decided to withdraw his funding. Drake took a personal line of credit, and just before his final funds ran out, he got lucky. On this picture, we see Drake with the nation's first refinery. A year later, Pennsylvania was the richest oil-producing region on Earth. And by 1880, the United States was responsible for 85% of the world's crude oil production. But Drake died a poor man. He never patented his drilling method, and he had not purchased much land. The oil boom grew out of his control and was ultimately tamed by the Rockefellers, who now owned 90% of US oil refineries and pipelines, and they had the world's largest fleet of oil tankers. Around that time, the attention shifted to other regions, and especially to Texas. By that time, Texas was still principally driven by agriculture. The mechanization of farm work was in full swing, enabling farmers to produce more food with fewer people. The state had invested in railroads, which drastically affected Texans' lives. But nothing could prepare them for what would happen next. At Spindletop, near Beaumont, A well-named Lucas No. 1 started gushing oil more than 100 feet into the air. It took 9 days to cap, and this discovery fueled a major oil rush in the region. A year later, the Spindletop oil field was producing 17.5 million barrels in just 1 year, out of the year's total oil production of 18 million. The discovery led to an influx of hundreds of wildcatters lusting after a piece of the action, as well as thousands of workers looking for jobs. This was followed by the emergence of related industries like supply and manufacturing firms, dealers and refineries, as well as scam artists, gamblers, and liquor dealers, all looking to get a chunk of the workers' paychecks. This was the beginning of the modern industrial era of Texas. In 1908, Henry Ford introduced his Model T, the world's first inexpensive, mass-produced car, which led to an increased demand for petroleum. And in 1911, Standard Oil had gotten so large that it was broken into smaller, separate entities. The Spindletop discovery became the birthplace of other oil giants like Texaco and Gulf Oil, and these industries had a ripple effect across the state. The railroads converted from coal to oil, and roads were paved to facilitate the use of cars. People moved to the city, and the oil money was invested in education, arts, and scientific research. It affected every aspect of the lives of Texans, but this was really just a start. If we lay US oil production on a chart, with this red line being Texas, we see that it went down in the 1900s before eventually going up and absolutely exploding since the 1920s. In 1950, Texas first produced 1 billion barrels of oil in 1 year. But here's the thing, right before oil production got into high gear, the people were made to believe something else. The US Geological Survey in 1919 predicted that oil supplies would run out within a decade. There had been widespread shortages of oil in the years prior, giving credibility to these claims. This prediction triggered the country's first nationwide oil security fears, and the recommendations were clear. First, petroleum had to be preserved. Second and third, more research is required. And the greatest waste of petroleum has been in exporting crude petroleum and petroleum products to foreign countries. In just a few decades since the emergence of the global oil industry, the United States had become addicted, and narratives that oil production was less than oil consumption became widely repeated. Warnings of oil shortages and seeing the United States as a dependent nation instilled fear in the American public. There were a total of 7 oil shortages before 1950, and each time there were plenty of individuals ready to prove that crude oil would be exhausted within a few years. But it never did. Here's a quote I found from 1958. "We usually find oil in new places with old ideas. Sometimes also, we find oil in old places with a new idea, but we seldom find oil in an old place with an old idea. Several times in the past, we thought that we were running out of oil, whereas we were only running out of ideas." In 1950, the US Geological Survey estimated that the world's oil endowment was 600 billion barrels. This figure gradually increased to an estimated 3,000 billion barrels by the year 2000. After 5 decades of consumption, they estimate that there's now more oil left than in 1950. The oil industry has become global, and the debate about US energy has shifted focus over the decades, shaped by geopolitics, technological advances, and concerns over climate change.
I indicated that the sudden cutoff of oil from the Middle East had turned into a major energy crisis.
After the 1973 oil crisis, it increasingly centered around strategic risks. This crisis showed how external price hikes could affect the US economy. It also forced several administrations to keep relationships with some of the least democratic but very oil-rich nations. In recent years, the United States has increased its oil production, especially in Texas. Even though there are fewer active rigs, better technology has resulted in a much higher production. There's no question that at some point the oil will run out, but this is unlikely to happen within our lifetimes or even our children's lifetimes. US oil production has seldom been so high, and it finally caught up to match consumption. But yet, in 2020, the United States was still importing about 40% of their oil, and this was increasingly imported from Russia. At the time that Russia invaded Ukraine, the United States imported a record number of 672,000 barrels of petroleum per day before banning all imports. But today, of the 8 million barrels that are still being imported, little over half comes from Canada, and much of the rest comes from the Persian Gulf and from OPEC countries. Why wouldn't they just use the oil that they produce? The problem is that the United States lacks the capacity to refine all the crude oil that it produces into fuels such as gasoline and diesel. It has primarily the capacity to produce light sweet oil, but most refineries in the US are designed to process heavy sour oil. It boils down to simple economics. Overseas oil, even after shipping costs, is often cheaper than domestically produced oil. Many companies, as a result, import the types of oils for which they have the existing refining infrastructures. Now, to answer the question why we're constantly being told that oil is running out, we must enter the realm of speculation. One theory is that periodic energy crises are used by politicians to criticize their incumbent. It's leveraged to achieve political ambitions in the energy sector. But there are also real concerns about whether we can produce enough oil to satisfy the global demand. And some earlier claims were perhaps rooted in insufficient research. The amount of crude oil we produce is thus more dependent on the political will to allow extraction, our own inventiveness, and our technical ingenuity, rather than the limitations imposed on us by Mother Nature. At least, for now. If you want to see another video, please consider watching one of these two videos next.